Welcome, one and all, to Champions, our review of Norwich City's EFL Championship 2018-19 season, one that panned out pretty much exactly how we all felt it would. I think we can all agree on that. I am PinkUn show and podcast host Michael Bailey. Hello there, and helping us relive a gloriously epic season across all 5 parts of our review, yes, 5, is a man with the second most powerful spreadsheet in Norfolk, Twitter's very own NCFC numbers, Steve Sanders. Hey Steve, how are you?
I'm very well. Who's got a more powerful spreadsheet than I have? I thought I was number one.
I was wondering that as well.
I was going to put it down to the sporting director Stuart Webber and his grand plans for the football club. Yeah. But to be honest, I mean, you've probably got a second page there somewhere.
I don't mind playing second fiddle to Stuart. That's fine.
Indeed. Are you looking forward to all these parts? We've got a lot to get through.
We have got a lot to get through. A lot of good games to get through. Not all in this part, but
sorry, Pat.
Clearly, I don't need to tell Norwich City fans that. There were lots of exciting games. There were lots of goals. Hopefully, I'll be able to provide a lot of figures. And we've got a lot to get through. So, yeah, I'll let you crack on.
What a marriage made in heaven. PinkUn.com and NCFC numbers on Twitter. Long story short, we have split this season into 5 chunks, and we're going to relive each one with a different guest, hopefully at a different venue. Hear your views, the pick of Steve's stats, of course, and generally bask in every bit of a memorable season that saw Norwich City become English Football League champions. And I'm sorry if I've just spoiled the ending for you. Right, let's crack on. This is part 1, where we start right from those auspicious beginnings. I wonder who got the lucky straw to join us. Yes, for part 1 of 5, we are right here at Archant Towers, our home away from home. PinkUn.com's very own Chief Norwich City correspondent, Paddy Davitt, is with us. Pad, you got the short straw.
No problem at all, boys. Although, as I told you both, I did miss Birmingham and Wigan, which is the final part of part 1, so don't know why I'm here, but there you go.
No, you're here for your expert analysis, and
we're going to roll on from there.
We want to know exactly what you were doing when those games were going on, if you can remember that. How are you? Are you well? Are you enjoying the summer?
Yeah, it's all quite chilled, but I did a little bit for our PinkUn app the other day and a bit of cross promotion there, and I did make the point I was quite bored already. It's only been 2 weeks. So, roll on June the 13th.
Exactly.
And the fixtures for the Premier League. But obviously before then, we're going to build up to that by looking back on, well, as you boys being Norwich fans would probably testify, a season like no other.
Indeed, we're going to relive a special one. And we're going to set the scene first, given, taking us back a long time now to the actual 12 months ago and the last transfer window that went on during the summer. And there was a lot of change, wasn't there, Pad? Big sales, James Maddison, Josh Murphy, Nelson Oliveira was apparently going to be exiled, as we saw. I mean, all the goals went, basically, didn't they? How worried were you?
I think you had to be. And not only as you mapped out there what happened in last summer, but they limped into it, 14th, was it? 15th, behind, dare I say, Ipswich for the first time in a long, long time. And just the football, the results, everything was rather down pan, and in that context, going into the season, I think there was a little bit of trepidation, because you would have to be honest and say the Farker-Webber experiment wasn't bearing fruit as anybody hoped it would, and if anything, it felt like it had stalled a little bit over the second part of last season. So with what happened on the pitch, then you lose Maddison, then you lose Josh Murphy. You bring in a guy nobody, I don't think, unless you play Football Manager, had heard of in Timu Puki. Emi Buendia again, in a team who had got relegated to the 3rd tier of the Spanish league. Very hard looking back from that point to where we are now to see what was to come. So, I think most Norwich fans were a little bit nervous, to put it mildly.
Yeah, a little bit. What were your predictions at the start of the season, Steve? Other than you were going to smash it with your spreadsheet?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I came nowhere near this. I had us finishing 16th. I couldn't see us improving without Maddison. I thought he was such an integral player. I think we were probably more a one-man team the season before last than I've ever known us to be, in terms of if Maddison didn't turn up, then we didn't seem to. And I just couldn't see how we were going to fill that void. As it turned out, a lot of the new signings managed it. A lot of the players we already had stepped up, and obviously that's all still to come. But I was one of those glass half empty. I can't see us bettering where we were before. In fact, I think I said that Ipswich would finish above us, and this would be the year that we would that run would end in East Anglian derbies. I don't mind admitting it.
Yeah, I think we probably thought that was bound to happen at some point. I remember thinking, and Norwich had been here before, you're obviously selling big players. You either managed to buy a lot of players who could fill the gap, and you do manage to make some improvement, or you don't, and you're in serious trouble. Turns out they got the right side of that coin, thank goodness. I tell you what, we did actually take some of our predictions from earlier this season when we spoke to Stuart Hodge, who we'll hear from later, by the way. Here's some of the things we said before the season really got going. 13th.
Lucky for some.
Try and go up the season after.
10th.
I still think they'll pick up. There's a long way to go as we sit here today.
Yeah, I'm trying to set my bar pretty low so that I'm pleased when they finish their 12th.
Who's going to be top scorer?
Jordan Rhodes. He'll get the chances and the opportunities, and hopefully he'll stay fit.
Jordan Rhodes.
Yeah, Jordan Rhodes. I'm happy with Jordan Rhodes. I think he was an upgrade on what they had.
Well, he's going to be double figures surely, otherwise we're really screwed.
Who's your favourite of the summer transfer acquisition?
I'd have to say maybe Rhodes.
I like Kenny McLean, and I think Ben Marshall's got something about him, although I don't really want to see too much more of him at right back. Pucky's doing quite well as well, actually. He's stood up.
I have not seen him play yet. Emi Buendia is the one I'm really looking forward to.
Who do you think is going to be player of the year?
If he continues in the same vein as he is at the minute, Onel Hernandez, I think, will walk it.
If Onel keeps doing what he's doing, clearly he will be that because of the level of progression. Let's just hope they're three really strong candidates so that Norwich have had a good season. It's not like the keeper. We're not ashamed of our predictions, are we now, Pad?
I genuinely can't remember what I said, so whatever I said was probably very wrong, a bit like Steve, but glad to be proved wrong.
Exactly, isn't that the exact thing? And actually, Tony, if you can pop this in, we had Di Cunningham of Proud Canaries on the PinkUn show earlier in the season. She managed to find this clip because she was obviously very proud of it, whereas I just basically laughed at what she said, and here is what she said.
Can't believe I just said Obs. Right, so that's all good. Let's have a look at... final question. So we did all our predictions for where Norwich will finish. Where will Norwich finish, Di?
Oh, okay. I'm gonna say playoffs.
Okay.
I think it might be automatic, but I'm gonna say playoffs. I'm gonna say so.
And that was, of course, Norwich finishing in the automatic promotion places. I literally laughed out loud at Di. I mean, I'm sorry, Di.
It was a laughable idea at that time, wasn't it?
Yes, Di.
Yeah.
Laughable idea. I tell you one more thing we can catch on as well is the fans' predictions and feelings. Steve, you put out a tweet, didn't you, asking for those?
Yeah, I've got loads back, so thank you ever so much. We got a nice... We've got a nice mix of people saying, well, I was cautiously optimistic. I think if we had a few playoffs. A few people actually put money on Norwich City. They didn't say whether that's something they do every season or not, or whether it just came right this time. But yeah, there was a definite mixture of those who, like us, were not seeing Norwich going anywhere fast, and those who I think had that belief that we might do something.
It's always fascinating viewing and listening after the event. So here are some of those. Let's crack on with the games then, shall we? Opening day trip to Birmingham. Although, as you rightly said, Pat, I forgot you weren't there with us. Sorry, that's quite bad. It's a long season, isn't it? But do you remember how you followed this? It was 2-2 draw, of course, away from home. Do you remember how you followed it at all?
I'm trying to think. Well, I think I might have been on a stag in Manchester, not my own. And if I'm honest, I probably didn't check until after the final whistle. So if you want a breakdown, you're asking the wrong man. But it was nice to see that they'd managed to earn a point, because in my experience, Birmingham I remember 3-0 was it when we went there with Sergi Canos, the only time he played in the league for Norwich under Alec Neil. Always a very, very difficult place to get anything. although they did win on Boxing Day, didn't they? The last season, that was Jamal Lewis's opening salvo in a Norwich shirt. But I think when I look back at the result, I thought, well, that's a decent point, because I fancied Gary Monk to improve them. And the opening day, of course, things haven't gelled. And as we've got here, so many new faces. And to repeat myself, you're bouncing in, or you're rather limping in off the back of getting hammered at Sheffield Wednesday, finishing mid-table. You're losing your two most creative players over the summer. I think it was a little bit of a leap into the unknown. So I think in that context, opening day, don't get beat away from home, you probably would have taken it. But obviously the way the game panned out, it was tinged with a little bit of disappointment, I think.
Yeah, indeed. Five new faces on the day, I think, and Kenny McLean came off from the bench, as I've got written here. I mean, it's a good example of the fact that Norwich's maybe recruitment wasn't 100% bang on the money, because Ben Marsh was at right back that day.
Yeah, that's true. God, it seems like a long time ago that now, doesn't it? Yeah, before we saw Max Tarrant hit the scene. Yeah, I think for me the amount of kind of flux that we'd seen was typified by the fact the only surviving player from the first game of the previous season was James Husband. Anyone remember him?
James Husband.
Yeah,
he's got a chance in the Premier League now. Carry on.
Yeah, it was one of those. I think there were positives and negatives, as there sort of inevitably are on a lot of first day of the season games. We conceded from a corner, first corner of the season, which probably came as no surprise to anyone at that point. But I think the real positives were obviously Onel and Dennis Strabeni coming off the bench and making that second goal. And they were two players that we signed in January the previous season. So it was one of those where you could maybe start to see some of the development that had happened over the summer. And yeah, as Paddy says, good point to get.
I've got some. You give me a little bit of helping hand with this first game, which is nice. He's me and Steve. But of course, Nel Hernandez got both goals, and we'll speak about those in a moment. Both equalisers in the final 10 minutes. So I mean, that was a good trend for the way that things were going to go from there. And he ripped off his shirt for the second one, and didn't throw it at Daniel, much like Nelson Oliveira did 12 months earlier in the opening game of the season too. A remarkable stat here about Nel as well that I've got written down from you, Steve.
Go on, which one is that?
First player to score 2 from open play in a Daniel Farke league game.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, which again seems like an absolute age ago now. I think the only player to have done it the previous season was Maddison, but clearly that was in his hat-trick where he scored 2 penalties. So yeah, it was the start of some obviously brilliant individual performances, many of them from Onel himself. And again, I'm going to keep saying this, but it feels like a long time ago, but this was really his time, and he had a great season over the course of it. But I think at this point, a lot of people were saying, this guy's going to be the player for us this season. And a few of the early games, we really were building our performances, certainly from an attacking point of view, around him. Looking at his season more generally, I would say maybe the one thing to improve on is the finishing. I don't know if I'm being overly critical there. He scored.
I think you've been rather generous to him, mate, if I'm brutally honest. But you go on.
Well, just to add some figures to that, he had the second most shots this season. He scored 8 goals from 88 shots. Compare that to Vrancic, who got 10 from 43. And there's an issue there, I would say, which I'm sure Paddy is going to add to.
Well, I just remember doing a column after his heroics, for want of a better word, against Forest over the festive period, which you guys will discuss later on, saying that, just that, Steve, that for me his end product isn't good enough, and he will need to improve radically in that department. But you do look at his numbers and they look quite healthy. 8 goals, I think he had 10 assists, more than decent at the level he was operating at. But the frustration I have with him is there's so much more to come from him. He's got so much raw material. He offers a completely different dimension to a lot of Farke's midfielders, because he's direct. You get the sense he's not quite sure what he's going to do when the ball arrives at his feet, and that's also a strength as much as a weakness. But no, he's a frustrating player and he needs to improve. And I still stand by the column I wrote round about January that his numbers in the round more than healthy, but if he's going to operate at the highest level, he needs to be far better in terms of his end product. And he's not the only one in his team. I think I'd put Jamal in that category as well. I think when he gets in the final third, he needs to be better. His final decision making needs to be better. You contrast Max Aarons' productivity and their chalk and cheese in that respect. So yeah, he's not the only one, but of course the nature of where he plays on the pitch, he needs to be producing goals and assists. And yes, he did them in decent quantities this season, but the nature of going into the Premier League, better players, better tactical setups, better coaching, he's going to have to be far better in that aspect.
Let's hope he can make another similar size jump forward, I suppose, during the summer. I mean, that was his first goal for the club, I think, wasn't it, at Birmingham? So at least he made that stride forward and we got to enjoy him. Points rescued in the last 10 minutes, Steve? Do you want to do that now, or are we going to do it later?
Do that further down the line.
Further down the line. Good stuff. All right, well, tell you what, then let's move on to West Brom, shall we? Norwich City's first home game of the season. All those boring games the season before didn't start off quite like that, did it? This was a ridiculous game, really, wasn't it? And watching it again, I mean, there's so many chances and it was ebbs and flows, and I guess it was kind of errors that cost Norwich so early on, wasn't it?
Big errors. I think it was 1-1 going into half-time. Norwich get a penalty. Jordan Rhodes doesn't take the penalty. There was the start of a worrying theme for the season, and they would have been more than merited it, because West Brom, obviously we didn't know subsequently that West Brom would tail off a little bit, but when at the start of the season, when this fixture was announced, you thought, well, that's going to be very tough. They're going to be bang at the sharp end of the table. But yet Norwich, after that first 45 minutes or so, were full value. But to go in at 1-1, you've missed the penalty. Then 2 minutes after half-time, Jay Rodriguez, really speculative shot. Tim Krul parries it into his net, and you're 2-1 down. And as you say, it just went from there. And Norwich felt the wrong side of it. But if you're looking for signposts and trying to draw a curtain on what had gone before, and this is the start of a new era, it felt like they'd squandered an opportunity at that day, because I think West Brom were there for the taking in the first half.
Yeah, they kept scoring late goals though, Norwich. I mean, they did keep pushing West Brom, which was interesting. Of course, Timo Pukki's first goal for the club as well. I think he'd go on to get a few more.
Yeah, I do recognise that name from somewhere. Yeah, I think there was quite a lot of positivity, actually, I think, despite this defeat, maybe because it was so different to the sort of soporific home performances that we got the season before. So at least there was a bit of excitement. I kind of viewed it as the first home game, and your new striker misses a penalty and your new goalkeeper kind of palms one into his own net. Probably not an ideal start. But just to go back to Onel, I know we kind of covered him, but to give him perhaps a bit more credit in the box. 2 assists, put the cross in for the first goal, which Pukki kind of hooked back, and won the penalty. I'd say in terms of individual performances that we'd seen all season, this must have been up there with one of the best ones. In fact, his cross for Hanley's goal was just terrific, wasn't it? It was the first time we conceded 4 or more in a game outside the top flight of Carrow Road since the 7-1 to Colchester in August 2009. So it doesn't happen very often that we're that open. But we did also have 10 shots on target, which is the most that we'd had in any game under Daniel Farke at that point.
It was all there if we'd looked for it in the second game of the season. It's funny you mentioned about Krul's penalty miss. Krul's throwing one in the net. Rhodes' penalty miss. They were the two players I think most of us kind of said, they're going to be the crucial players for Norwich this year. You go into that game and you're like, uh-oh. Norwich then back at home for the Carabao Cup opener, home to Stevenage. Obviously, I'm not going to touch too much on the cup games, but the things here, I suppose. Kenny McLean, decent performance, but then an injury, which would rule him out for so long. And Max Aaron's debut at left back.
Well, if you tell me he was at left back, I'll believe you, even though I was at the game. So, yeah, but I do record Kenny McLean, and it was a poor challenge right in front of the Barclay. And the ball had actually gone out of play, and the guy's just come through the back of him. I can't quite remember what the score was at that moment, but just looked a very petulant act. But unfortunately, and although Kenny played on, in fact, he had a good chance as well within 5 minutes of that incident. But clearly, thereafter, complications with ankle ligament surgery, and we didn't see him for months. So that was a costly one, despite they obviously went through on the night. And I think Pukki again stepped up, didn't he, towards the end?
He did indeed, and one sort of fluked in off Zimmerman's heel, which is a great goal. Norwich back in league form away to Sheffield United. I guess little did we really think that those would be the two sides that would end up getting automatic promotion at the end of it. Of course, it was a really late defeat. I still remember the moment where Moritz Leitner was through 1-on-1. Yeah, he was so clearly offside that it'd have been ridiculous had it been given, I think. But to concede that late, I mean, there's two sides of it, I suppose. They could have been sort of 3-0 down in the first 20 minutes, couldn't they? Because Sheffield United were bang at it. But then, likewise, to lose with basically the last kick was monumentally frustrating, actually.
Yeah, 2 takeaways from me. We touched on it before in terms of the Birmingham opener, but they got done on a corner again. Really poor. I think they lost the back post header, and then they lost the next header. And then Ben Marshall, the final nail in his coffin as a right back, when the ball got switched diagonally, stoppage time, he's lost his marker, and I think the ball's been cut back, and there's Billy Sharp near post. So that was the end of Ben Marshall for me as a right back, I think, and probably for Daniel as well. So saw one to lose that late, but as it turned out, I think, was it only Preston who beat them again on the road? Yeah. So, 3 games in, second away game, and that's your penultimate away defeat. Absolutely ridiculous.
It's just no kind of... I can't imagine Norwich have done that away from home before.
No, and the amazing thing is, actually, this was a 10th game away from home without a win. It was the longest run outside the top flight since 2007 without an away win. So to go from that... And again, it's so easy to forget that to what they ended up doing, as you say, 1 defeat for the rest of the season. Quite amazing, really. Yeah, I kind of thought maybe it's going to be one of those seasons. It was the 6th game in a row that we conceded from a set piece as well. So it was we just looked like we weren't going to quite have enough at this point. And as you say, little did we know that Sheffield United would turn out to be the team that they were as well. They were the only team to beat us twice in the calendar year of 2018. So they've kind of got a little bit of the rubber over us at the moment. Yeah, and in the end it was us that ended up inflicting all the late defeats for the rest of the season.
It was indeed. And there was a lovely picture from that game of Daniel Farke just with his arm around Emi Buendia looking over an empty Bramall Lane before kick-off, because it was then the following game at home to Preston, midweek game, of course, Alec Neil's return, that Emi Buendia got his first outing in a shirt, which happened with about 20 minutes to go. It was 0-0 up until that point, and it was a truly atrocious game. By the way, Alex Tettey in this game was awful, and he said as much after the game too. Whatever made it happen, those two things probably helped, because Buendia was on the pitch and Alex Tettey scored an incredible goal, really. I think actually Tim Closer eventually called it his favourite or most impressive goal of the year, because of wrong foot going backwards on the half volley. It is fairly ridiculous when you watch it again.
I think that was his only goal. Just done something else in the last day or two. I think that was the only goal, so it was a memorable one. It was your only one for the season, but yeah, you're right. He was terrible by his own admission. I think at 0-0, he just given the ball away. My abiding memory of that game was he gave the ball away with a square attempted pass. Callum Robinson intercepted, smacked it against the bar. Now you can imagine in the context of a stuttering, positives, but a stuttering start to the season on the back of what happened the season before. Preston go 1-0 up there. Carrow Road would not have been happy at the final whistle. So small margins.
Yeah, with the recurring theme as we go through some of the other games as well, especially hitting the crossbar. Alex Tettey. I mean, let's be honest. In the summer, it was a good chance he would have left. To be honest, he got a 2-year deal when he was going to be out of contract.
Yeah, it's kind of felt like that with Tettey throughout the Farke career, hasn't it? Really, that it almost feels like he's going to be phased out. He's going to be phased out, and then he kind of kept coming back. And I can't remember. You remember better than me. Did he say this was his worst game that he'd had for Norwich City?
Yeah,
and he's obviously.
I don't think he used those words.
He clearly ended up becoming a key player in the first half of the season before kind of, I suppose you'd say, Tribal took over that role so adeptly. I don't know where that leaves him now. He's obviously the only player that he's been promoted with us before in the current squad. But yeah, in terms of this game itself, to me, I remember there being a lot of tension and unrest in the stadium, and I promise we're not going to keep harking back to 17-18 too much, but it reminded me a lot of the QPR game the season before, where we kind of had not started as well as we'd hoped to, and it was this kind of key midweek home game, and we left it late but got the job done, and it didn't kickstart it in the short term, but it was an important win.
Exactly, and that was obviously at the same point in that season, wasn't it? It was a point where they needed a win. I guess Norwich City's only other away defeat in the league at Preston was the moment at which Tettey was kind of ditched out, wasn't he? He got his injury, and then Tom Tribal took over from there. One little thing I do like, I love the view from behind the goal of Teemu Pukki's strike, because it's such a neat little move, but the finish is so precise, it's so dead-eyed, and the camera's right behind it. I think it says everything about Teemu Pukki's efficiency. We'll come on to Teemu. Now, game 5, already up to 5 already. Leeds United running away with it. This was almost the point where they won the division, I think, actually, early August. This is a strange game, isn't it? Because this was quite a comprehensive defeat, but it wasn't that straightforward, was it?
No, absolutely not. Again, parallel with West Brom. Maybe not the first half, but certainly the first half of the first half. Norwich ran over the top of them. I can remember Moritz Leitner was pulling the strings. The crowd, conversely to the Preston game, were bang up for it because Norwich just started on the front foot, almost as if that's the mindset Farke had sent them out with. That because Leeds, I think, arrived at Carrow, if not top, very near the top, and they knew they had to be very, very positive and on the front foot, and we saw that. Didn't get a breakthrough, and then they paid again for some poor decision making. I remember they got done on a swift counter. They had too many men up the park. Krul padded one in at his near post. Not as bad as the West Brom goal, but still at fault. And then Leeds slipped into cruise control. But I double checked the lineup for Norwich that day, and really you would only say there was 5 survivors from that game, 5 games into the end of the season. Krul, Lewis, Tribal, O'Neill and Pookie. So the turnover from 5 games into the season to the established 11 we got down the stretch, it just shows you, again, this was still at this stage very much a work in progress.
Absolutely. And really interesting for me that actually it was only after the season finished that Tim Krul kind of reminded us all that he'd only had 2 pre-season games at this point and a week basically of pre-season training before being thrust into championship action over the first 5 weeks. And maybe retrospectively you could put a lot of that down to the sort of rustiness in his performance and sharpness, I suppose.
Yeah, I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, really. I think it was the second goal, wasn't it, where he sort of got beaten at his near post, and it looked like he should have stopped it. But I think, as you say, it felt like he was rusty at that point. I mean, for me, actually, the one player who I thought, the same take that was the end of Ben Marshall as a right back at Sheffield United, I actually thought Evo had a really poor one. All 3 goals kind of came down his side with various degrees of culpability. Certainly the first one where he didn't track his runner. That's probably him.
That's Evo. Evo's on the phone. What are you doing?
That's all the way from Zagreb. And I think that turned out to be really the last we saw of him in the league, wasn't it? And actually, of those names, I thought Tribal had a bit of a shocking game as well. And I remember thinking, maybe we've seen the best of him, and that one clearly I got 100% wrong. So,
it was a wobbly start. I don't think you could argue about the wobbly start. Now, 2 very interesting games before we have a quick look at the table. Carabao Cup second round trip to Cardiff, Premier League Cardiff, of course, although not anymore. I think we sort of this was so interesting. I don't know how much it was by design, but Daniel Farke made a lot of changes. He played a fresh side. We'd kind of always assumed, well, yeah, he changes it, but he always sticks with the league team. But in this instance, you'd have to say, in terms of what Max Aarons did and Marco Stiepermann, this was a red letter day for them because they really made statements in this kind of game.
Well, yeah, I mean, to pick up Steve's thread there about Evo, I mean, that was part of the equation, but his fate was sealed because Max Aarons that night was literally, move out of the way, I belong in this first team, and I'm going to show you that I can operate on the same level as these players. He was excellent. He scored his goal, but he wasn't in the side for the goal. But just the composure and the confidence from such a young man. But also, I mean, Dennis Srebeni scored an unbelievable goal that night, and that's probably the last thing he did in terms of his usefulness on the pitch, which wasn't a lot down to him. It was down to a certain Finnish international moving centre stage. But Marco as well that night. But it was very difficult because you're talking about Norwich's changes. I think Cardiff pretty much changed their first 11. I think they might have had Man City in the Premier League the following week, and it was clear where Warnock's priorities lay. So it was hard to get a measure of how good that Norwich performance was because it was, yes, Norwich made changes, but it was Cardiff's second string. But as it turned out, Aarons was the real deal, and so was Marco Stiepermann.
Marco Stiepermann as a number 10. It would never work.
Yeah, it was completely unheard of. It's kind of the flip side of Paddy's point that he made in the Leeds game. Six of the team that started this were part of their 8 games in a row team towards the back end of the season. So actually this was looking, funny enough, more like the team that we'd be getting used to towards the end.
Than the Leeds game. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, more like the team in the Leeds game, which is crazy to think. But Dennis, only the 3rd player since the heady days of the 1990s to score 2 goals at a Premier League ground. Dean Ashton and Grant Holt being the others. Wow. So he joins some pretty handy company.
So there's a few more who join that come next season. We're not going to talk about next season, obviously. Now, the Cardiff game was obviously a step in the right direction, but let's be honest, Norwich have played 5 league games. They'd only won 1 of them, and they headed to Ipswich. Rejuvenated under Paul Hurst. I think possibly they're just about getting away with that at that point. We all know how it would finish, of course. But I think this was the one for me. Derby dominance, all that sort of stuff. This is where it's going to end. And then what happens? Grant Edwards scores and they're behind. And Grant Hanley gets injured, so they stick Ben Godfrey in at centre-back. And in fact, I think that substitution was just before Ipswich then took the lead. It was all going to unravel here. How important was that Moritz Leitner goal in the grand scheme of things, Pad?
To me, this game and what it led to was an international break. And the other side of that, we'll get into this a little bit later, they beat Middlesbrough on the resumption. Those two games, that's Norwich's season for me. This is where the great leap forward, the transformation, we're no longer talking about a mid-table team, and is the project working with Farker and Webber, and come back James Maddison, we need you. No, these two games, Ipswich and then Middlesbrough, that for me is where it all happened. That was the white lightning crucible moment, the thunderbolt, because particularly within the context you touched on it there, Portman Road, they're 1-0 down after half time. That was loud. Portman Road was loud because they sensed blood, they sensed right. However many years of hurt since Lambert was a boy, was it the last time they beat Norwich? This was the day, and they got their noses in front. Closers had to go off at half time, and who comes on? Ben Godfrey, centre back. No, I'm not having that. Left back Jamal Lewis, still a young man. Max Aaron's making his league debut that day. You didn't hold out a lot of hope that they could salvage anything from that game, but they did. Leitner equalised. They really had to dig in immediately after Ipswich's goal. There was a 15-20 minute spell where it got very hairy. I remember Ben Godfrey, slightly fortunate, maybe stay on the pitch. He launched himself into a tackle, almost a 2-footed lunge, got away with it. They rode out the storm. Leitner scores at the other end, and okay, it was on as even on that day, but looking back now, that was the moment for me, because it was A, getting a result in very difficult terrain, and B, the emergence of Godfrey as a centre-back option alongside Aarons and Lewis. 3 young kids in front of Tim Krul, with Grant Hanley helping him. He was very good that day, actually, in his leadership role. But yeah, that was the one. And sweet that it was obviously Ipswich and they were able to prolong the derby. Hoodoo as well.
Yes, indeed. I just remember the amount of energy around Ipswich at that time, because I think they did feel it was going to be a new dawn for them all. And a lovely goal from Moritz Leitner, the way he took it as well, and it's it's cultured finish as he tended to produce.
Yeah, fabulous goal, and it was actually a shocking game as well. Really, our pass completion was the lowest that it got all season. It was more fouls than any other game this season, and I think. I don't know what you feel like the mood was at that time. Had Leitner not scored, would we be talking about Farker losing his job? I mean, we started the game 20th, so it certainly there were murmurings at that point. In terms of the goal itself, yeah, lovely strike, and Leitner is another one of those who we're talking about the first half of the season rather than the second. I don't know how he would assess his season as a whole. It probably comes as no surprise to anyone that he played more passes than any other Norwich City player in 15 of the 20 games he started. That is his game. But talking about his general impact, I thought it'd be worth having a look at how he compares to Mario and to Mayor Kenny, and to kind
spoiler alert.
Yeah, and to see how they compare with each other. And actually, Leitner, although we all know what he brings to Norwich, perhaps in terms of his overall impact, if you look at goals and assists, Mario is way out in front, as you would expect. Then it comes to passing, and Leitner comes into a kind of class of his own, really, doesn't he? Passes per game, the number that he completes as a percentage, and the number of key passes he plays, which I assume is those leading to chances. And then from what I thought was interesting, and obviously we'll talk about this more further down the line, but the way Kenny, in terms of the defensive side of the game, is so much more adept in terms of his tackles, the headers he wins, and the interceptions. It's not something that I'd actually appreciated until I looked at these numbers. And that might be why we saw him more at the back and less of Leitner, I wonder.
It's really interesting, and it sort of factors into the recruitment and how Norwich, Stuart Webber, Daniel Farker and the recruitment team brought in players who were similar in a theme but could just do something slightly, just tweak the way they do things.
Yeah, very good point Steve makes there, because those three are all very technically proficient midfielders, but they're not like for like, are they? Leitner isn't a similar player to McLean in terms of a clone, and Vrancic, again, different dimensions, and it's that blend that's probably allowed Norwich to almost stay one step ahead, that Farker was always able to throw another element into the mix in that midfield, in and around the staples of Stiepermann and Buendia and Onel, of course. But that's a great point. McLean's defensive work, I remember Farker a bit further into the season, the Rotherham away game, where he really, really talked up his abilities to sense danger, break up the play, almost Alex Tettey type qualities, and you maybe take that a little bit for granted, or almost overlook it. But he did make them a little bit more stable without the ball. But yeah, it's difficult. I mean, you can't really. It's not really a like for like. Is it Vrancic? Should it be Leitner? Because they are two different players, and those stats bear it out. 17 goals / assists compared to 3 for Leitner. But then what Leitner brings is a composure and an ability to build the play, probably a bit better than Mario, because that's not really Mario's game. So I think it just underlines for me that Norwich had a midfield that could do a little bit of everything, and then obviously you drop a Tete into the mix, a Tom Tribal, plus those others we just touched on. That's probably one of the strongest points of the season, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Have Ipswich had enough pain, or should we compare theirs and Norwich's seasons?
There'll be time for that. I have a feeling we had another decent result against them later on in the season, so maybe that might be the time to inflict a bit more pain on them.
Well, you can all wait for that one, Ipswich fans. We should just have a very brief look at the table, just while we're on that theme, though, at this point. We can see that Norwich and Ipswich are both in the bottom half. This is just after the Derby 6 games played. So Norwich went into that international break 17th. One of those points coming against Ipswich. Ipswich were, 23rd and already clearly struggling, and probably having hoped that it would start a bit better. And I remember people, as you mentioned, it was a horrible game. People after that just saying, well, this is shocking, the state of East Anglian football, blah, blah, blah. Look at it. It's a right old mess. And then the Middlesbrough game. Now, I mean, you touched on it was the change, Paddy, but what do you put that? Was it just personnel? Do you think that the club, the guys and girls at the club sat down and really had to think about it, or did it just sort of happen?
A little bit of everything. I think certainly having that 2-week window would have allowed Farker and his coaching staff and Stuart Webber just to take stock. In fact, subsequently, I recall Stuart Webber since the end of the season reflecting on that period, said there really was a sense within the leadership group there that they weren't that far away. The results hadn't backed up what they felt were the performances, the improving curve of level of performance, and that was proved because on the resumption we all know what Middlesbrough give you under Tony Pulis, but it wasn't just the fact that they won the game and Pukki scored a goal, and of course that was going to be a very common theme from that point onwards, but Norwich pretty much from first whistle to last dominated that game, and they were very good and very controlled, and you could almost see now the Farker template was beginning to work and be durable against, again, you would expected Middlesbrough to be up at the top end of the table, but Norwich were far more comprehensive than 1-0 suggests on that day, and I just think it was literally maybe being able to pause, take stock, reflect, and then carry on in the same vein where they'd left off against Ipswich and Cardiff, really. And as we've touched on, I think without having it to hand, I think the 11 against Middlesbrough would have started to look far more like the 11 who went on and underpinned an unbelievable season.
Indeed, Timmy Pukki getting a go up front. I think this was the first goal. Norwich won 1-0. First goal Middlesbrough conceded in the season.
Since the first day.
Yeah.
I think they drew at Millwall on the first day, but hadn't conceded since then, which I suppose you kind of associate with the Pulis team, don't you? Yeah, I think Paddy makes a really good point, actually, that this is when we started to see that team and that front four coming together, Pukki playing in that role, and it started to look like the Norwich that we now all know and love. For me, it wasn't the prettiest game of the season. I think it's the most important one. I mean, every great narrative's got to have an arc, and this is when ours started to head like that, I think. It was the lowest attendance we'd had all season, which I think reflects the mood at that point. I think nobody really came into the game expecting us to win, but we really did do a job on Borough. Thoroughly deserved the win with a little bit of luck maybe with the closer incident.
Oh, yeah. Even himself, I think, as he went in the dressing room after the game, said, I was a bit lucky there. I've never known anything like it. So, but it was the right decision, wasn't it?
It was offside, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And that was the point. And obviously the offside comes before the red card. Yeah. So you can complain about it all you like, but yeah, it was right.
Footnote now and a long season. Obviously a big chunk of games in this case, so we're going to rattle through a couple of them, but Norwich then followed up that win with back-to-back away games at Reading and at QPR. Reading were already struggling. I remember the Reading commentators sort of at half-time and full-time not really believing that Reading had been undone by a bang average Norwich side. That went out on the air apparently, so there we go, but Norwich won 2-1. Todd Cantwell, I think it was the first chance we had to see him for probably, was that even his debut?
It was his first
start. That's it. First start in the league. And Mario chipping in with a goal, which, as we've been talking about, was something he did quite well from the bench. And also, I think it was only a second, like a minute or two after it equalised.
72, 73, yeah.
And that made things a little bit ropey then, but clock it away. And then, of course, to QPR, where actually QPR were one of the form sides, even though they'd had a really wretched start. So this was sort of the ebbs and flows of the early season. And as I like to say, Tim Pukki scored the winner, and he scored it with his heart. That's my favourite line. My
McLaren wouldn't be having that. That was a good goal. Ball hit him, I think McLaren said.
Yeah.
Hit him and went in the net. That's all that matters, really.
Well, where's Steve McLaren now? That's the question, isn't it? And shall we focus on one of the maybe unsung heroes of the season and this game?
I think, well, we're talking about Jamal Lewis. I think he is a real unsung hero, actually. And I think he gets... There are comparisons with Aarons naturally, and Aarons is a slightly younger man, and obviously he's come through this season rather than last, so that goes in his favour. But just a couple of things on Lewis. We've not kept a clean sheet without him since 2017. Obviously he's played the majority of games, but that's a long time. The last 7 in the league we've played without him, we haven't won. So actually he does play an important part, and I think he's the only outfield player other than Pukki who's probably started every game this season where he's been available, just thinking of everyone that we've had. So Farke, obviously we haven't had maybe that left back, but Farke clearly rates him. And just looking at in terms of the number of games he started, it's easy to forget that he's still only 22 years old. 21 years old. And he started 42 games, and no defender has started that many in the last 30 years. Obviously, looking at the table now, Aarons and Godfrey are in there as well. I'm just having a look generally over those 30 years. 25% of all defenders who are 21 and under in that 30-year period have started this season. So 1 in 4. So that just goes to show it doesn't happen often. But we've had 3 outstanding young defenders come through. And Lewis maybe is the least kind of lauded of those 3, but he does a crucial job, and he did it in this game.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I feel a little bit sorry for Jamal because, if you didn't have a Max Aarons and latterly a Ben Godfrey, maybe even briefly we touched on him, Todd Cantwell, then I think he would be hailed far more than he has been. And it's a measure of his consistency, really, that you almost take him for granted now. And when you consider that, touched on it right at the start, that Birmingham game, the corresponding Birmingham game, Boxing Day 2017. That was his first start as a professional footballer. It's a phenomenal ascent, and not, I might add, just for his club. He's now Northern Ireland's first choice. Yeah. He's playing in Euro qualifiers, against, I remember they played Bosnia away. He's coming up against the likes of Edin Dzeko and Pjanic, the Juventus brilliant midfielder. This lad could be anything he wants to be. I mean, okay, if you're being ultra critical, there's still areas to work on his game, but he's 21 years of age. Of course he's not going to be the finished product, but the raw material, and Steve's right, Farke rates this guy highly, and what I like about him as well, he's very mature, he's level-headed, he knows he's not the finished article, and you can't see him resting on his laurels. So it's exciting times for Norwich fans to have him and Aarons, and you just hope that they can stay together for a little while longer, because there's no doubt that there'll be more established Premier League clubs who will be looking at these 2 and thinking, yeah, I fancy taking them. So, but there's no doubt about it. He's a very special young talent. Yeah,
bang on. And I think you could see that, especially when he came in and started this season. His level, I think he missed the first couple of games. As soon as he started playing this season, I just remember going, oh, he looks like he's taken a step from his sort of first 6 months in the side. So fair play, well done Jamal Lewis, what a season. One more stop off at the Carabao Cup, which was of course at Wickham. It was a 4-3 win in the end. It was a bit hairy in parts. I was at Centre Parks, so I was following this on Twitter, having a holiday, who knew it. A little bit more from Emmy in this game, and a hat-trick for Jordan Rhodes, which was a key point, I think, and also that Teemu Pukki was the one who congratulated him, I think, at half-time, didn't he?
I remember that, the old green kit, and that was nice to see. Yeah, it was nice to see because it underlined really the bond between those two, especially, but maybe the squad in more general terms. That it wasn't for show. There was a genuine delight on Puki's part that this guy had stepped into his shoes and shown everybody that he can score goals at a certain level. Albeit it was Wickham in the League Cup. But obviously it was swiftly roles reversed, and it was Jordan congratulating Pukki as the season progressed. But just a little window maybe into, and we heard more about it as the season progressed and we got into the defining phase. And You know, Hanley's on the touchlines, Close is on the touchline. You know, Alex Tete. Yet that bond and that togetherness was evident. And you don't achieve what Norwich did. It's all right to talk about this, but you don't achieve what Norwich did in the end without that kind of close-knit unity within the changing room.
Very true.
And 8 goals in 2 games at Adams Park, Jordan Rhodes, because he scored 5, hadn't he, for Huddersfield, however many years ago it was. Also the first time we'd ever won 3 away games in the space of 1 week.
Wow.
And to be fair, Norwich's away record has been patchy for long periods, so maybe that's not too much of a surprise.
No, this is very true. All right, let's round up this part, shall we, with a return to Carrow Road against Wigan. I think most people only remember this game for what happened in the final 5 minutes, although Dunkley did take out Timu Pukki when he was through on goal and blatantly should have conceded a penalty. Oh, I think it was in the box, I can't remember now. But Mario Vrancic actually scored the penalty, which was one of the few that actually counted as well, because when they did miss, they tended not to count, not to be too much of an issue.
Yeah, and one of few that he actually scored inside the box as well. So this one kind of broke all the rules. It was not a great game, especially Wigan were actually above us at this point, which obviously didn't last. In fact, I think we overtook them after this game. They didn't have a single shot on target, so it was one of those where we probably had huffed and puffed and eventually got what we deserved. And it was the first time, again, new record, we'd never won 5 games in a row by a single goal margin, and that's what we'd done over the previous 5 if you include the cup match. I want to know where Paddy was for this one.
Might have been the wedding of the stag. Thinking about it, yeah. But
didn't miss much.
No, well, yeah, exactly. But that's a great point Steve makes, that 5 games on the spin, they won by the odd goal. You know, as much as we associate now this swashbuckling, we'll score more goals whenever we fancy it type of approach, this phase, particularly of the season, they were just doing enough, and their game management was obviously very good. You know, and that. Again, if you're going to achieve what they achieved, it wasn't enough just to you score 3, we'll score 4 approach. You needed to have a little bit of this in your locker as well.
One kick to win a game or win a point. I think Mario Vrancic proved quite good at that over the course of the season. I've got a stat for you, Steve, just to end this part. It was before the 86th minute against Wigan, Norwich City had a positive goal difference for just 9 minutes under Daniel Farke, and that was when they opened scoring against West Brom in August. And this was the first time they finished a game with a positive goal difference. And I think it went back down to 0 after they lost to Stoke, and then obviously from then on
they never relinquished it. Do you think that'll continue into next season?
Of course it will, absolutely. You know, let's just add to the tally, I say. Here is the table. Have a quick look at it, because actually 10 games in, Norwich was sat 5th, and as you said, Steve, they'd just overtaken Wigan. I guess our point at this point was maybe the same point last season. They were flying into the top 6, and then it all sort of unravelled a bit, so maybe we were all being a little bit. If you look at that season, West Brom, Leeds, Middlesbrough, Sheffield United, you know, it was a bit of shape to it.
I suppose the point I was thinking at this time, actually, just to quickly go back to the Reading game, we'd actually had an identical start at that point to 2017-18, and I think it was around this time of the season in that year where we'd gone on that long unbeaten run. So I think for me at this point, I was still feeling like, well, that's fine, but let's see where we are in a month or two's time. Otherwise, this could be another false dawn.
False dawn, eh?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, great shout, because as much as it felt like they were making progress, the parallels were too obvious to ignore, and what you didn't want was them to tail away again, and thankfully they didn't.
That is part 1 done of our Norwich City review of the season, and we've managed to end it on a high, I think, just about. To think some people would think it would be a downbeat segment. You know, what are they talking about? Thank you so much, Paddy. As good a season as you've covered, do you reckon?
100%, mate, yeah. It's a phenomenal season, really. As an event, possibly the playoff final against Middlesbrough as an event, but as a body of work over 9 months, I don't think I'll see it again in my time.
This is the way, isn't
Sadly.
it? Well, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it, of course, here at Arch and Towers. Thanks to Steve as well. We'll be reunited for part 2 at a new Norwich City venue, and with one of the people involved in turning Carrow Road from where it was at the start of the season into a spectacular sight, which of course we saw by the end of the campaign. Along come Norwich indeed. I've written here. It's good. Until then, thank you all for watching and listening. We'll see you soon.